the summer of 2018, my angling buddy Lee and I embarked on a new adventure in the shape of a carp fishing campaign on a local river. Although my time over the season was severely limited due to being in the final year of a medical course at university, between the two of us we managed to make a total of 9 carp in around 20 day sessions and 2 overnighters, the biggest being a scaly 19-pound mirror and an immaculate common of 22 pounds. Having finished my studies and secured a job at the local hospital, it was now time to give the river some serious attention for the opening weekend of the 2019 season. I'm JJ and welcome to River Carping. Our first task for the new season was to prepare 2 new swims in an area where they would hopefully be left fairly untouched, so we set about finding a spot and started the preparations before pre-baiting each swim twice a week. June the 16th soon came around, and travelling as light as we always do for opening weekend, we soon arrived at the spots. Unfortunately, the duckweed that has become prevalent on this stretch of river had rendered my side of the swim completely unfishable. Lee had an aborted take shortly after midnight, but despite our best efforts in moving around the spots and trying other areas that we carved out during the close season, we ended the weekend with a blank. As luck would have it, I also had Monday the 17th off work. After making my way down to the river and walking up and down, I finally managed to open my 2019 river account with an 11-pound ghostie, stalked from the edge on a surface bait, satisfied. The following Saturday saw Lee and I back on the river after I'd spent the night on call. Given the spooky nature of these fish, Lee rightly suggested that we split the river into 2 sections to avoid spooking any fish that we were lucky enough to find. I got us off the mark first with a small common, followed a couple of hours later by a better fish of 16 pound, both taken on surface baits. The fish still seemed to be in a flighty mood, possibly getting ready for a second spawn. Although we tried a different tidal river a few hours that evening, nothing else came our way. When the following Thursday arrived, I'd had a pretty horrible night of being on call at the hospital. And with bright sunshine and strong winds forecast, I felt an afternoon on the river was just what I needed to decompress. I spotted 2 carp cruising the near margin when I arrived, and quickly lowered a couple of single hook baits onto spots that looked perfect if they decided to have a feed. With nothing happening and no further sightings after 2 hours, I had a quick look upstream and saw a huge patch of coloured water in the near margin. It looked like it had been absolutely torn up. This was followed quickly by a good sized common drifting right over the top of the spot. I retreated as quietly as I could, quickly returning with a single rod, net and an alarm. Once I was absolutely certain that the carp had left the area, I gently lowered a 20mm Solar Club Mix bottom bait tipped with a flavoured tiger nut onto the spot, slackening the line right off before hiding behind a bush. Less than 5 minutes later, all hell broke loose. Unfortunately, the strong winds drowned out my poor little camera mic here, but the end result of that fantastic fight with this lovely 17-pound common, the biggest of the season so far, the first one caught from the bottom, and the fourth river carp caught in just 4 trips. Considering this was only the 27th of June, I was more than happy with the results so far. By staying mobile, keeping my eyes peeled, and being stealthier than a Navy SEAL sniper, I'd managed to spot this carp, lay a trap, and watch from cover as he settled over the rig and made his mistake. Along with watching them take a surface bait, this has got to be one of the most enjoyable ways of catching carp. Being on the river is just the icing on the cake, where a carp of any size leaves you smiling for the rest of the week. The next trip was a short overnighter on the 3rd of July. After finishing work at the hospital at 8 p.m, I stopped at home to grab the rods and was on the bank just before 10. There's only a short stretch of the river where the controlling club allow night fishing, so imagine my horror when I'd driven all the way down there only to find it absolutely choked with weed. I very nearly got back in the car and went home, but instead I had to walk upstream out of desperation, and as luck would have it managed to find a hole big enough to have a realistic chance of landing anything. It was well into dark by now, and with time of the essence I decided to lower a couple of 20mm club mix bottom baits into the edge, topping up with 4 handfuls of hemp, tigers and crushed boilie over each rod. Before too long I was out like a light, definitely more hopeful than optimistic. Lo and behold, at 1:30 in the morning I had an absolute screamer, and with a bit of tricky negotiation through the weed, I managed to slip the net under my 5th river carp of the season, on only my 5th trip.
There we go, another one from the river. At 2 o'clock this morning. I think I've seen this little one before. The gnarly old river character, that's for sure. Taking in the edge and amongst a big load of duckweed. And a club mix bottom bait, tipped with a flavoured tiger nut again. Gave me a right run around the edge. That's another one from the river, on an overnighter, on a school night. Happy days. Anyway, I better get packed up and go to work. Thank you, buddy. Mwah. Lovely times.
My next session was an overnighter on the 10th of July. With the week getting worse on the river, I decided to try a session on another river that the club had access to, a tidal stretch of around 1.5 miles in beautiful countryside. Although I'd fished for pike here once previously, I'd never tried for the carp, although there were whispered rumours that there was some good fish to be had if you were prepared to work around the tides for them. I got to the river around 8:30 in the evening and introduced 2 kilos of hemp, tigers and 20mm club mix liberally around the swim. Being tidal, I suspected that the carp would be even more nomadic than normal, so all I was hoping to do with the bait was perhaps slow one down long enough to have a chance for pickup. The first bite came at 1 a.m. in the shape of a 7-pound bream, followed by a 4-pound chub at 3 a.m. This was all fun, but I really wanted to be in with the best chance of a carp. Sizing up to a size 4 angling iron curve pan, I baited with a 20mm club mix bottom bait and a 15mm pop-up, one of my little winter specials. This seemed to do the trick, as aside from the odd line of the rods remained motionless. I awoke to a beautiful day and considered packing up to go stalking, but it was such a nice spot I decided to leave the baits where they were and see what happened. Hours and hours passed, and just as I stood up to start packing away, one of the rods went into meltdown, taking me completely by surprise. After a savage fight up and down the river, I slipped the net under my first carp from the tidal. Shaking like a leaf, I felt like I had to pinch myself to be sure that this was all really happening.
Down here on the tidal river. First time I'd ever fished it was last night. Got here at 9, rods were out straight away pretty much. Put out a reasonable amount of bait, about a kilo and a half of 20mm club mix, some hemp, some tigers. Variety of rigs through the night as I was catching other species. I had a 4-pound chub, a bream that looked all an ounce of 8 pound. And then nothing throughout the night. I changed my rigs over to something a bit more substantial. Big size 4 curved shank hook, 20mm club mix bottom bait tipped with a 15mm pop-up. That seems to have done the trick as I had no more bites, but it is now coming up to 6:45 in the evening the following day. Those rods have been out there the whole time. I haven't touched them once. So getting on for 16, 17 hours, those rods have been out there. And just as I was thinking about packing up, one of them's just absolutely ripped off, and after a very hairy up and down battle in the net, I've got what looks like a decent sized tidal river mirror carp. So Absolutely buzzing. Let's get him out of the water and have a look in. Well, there she is, 15 pound on the nose of tidal Sussex River carp. Absolute fighting machine. This one beat me up, something chronic. 16 hours that rod had been out there for. It was worth every second of the wait. I'm absolutely made up with this. My first carp from this river. It's tidal. Just everything about it is perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Carp. You're beautiful. Mwah. Very, very happy days. Fantastic.
It turned out to be the last weekend in August before we had the chance to visit the river again. This time both Lee and I had the weekend off, so a 36-hour session was planned. The tides were the biggest of the year so far, so the conditions proved to be tricky, but it turns out we needn't have worried. This was going to be a river session that both of us would remember for a long time to come.
There we go. Lee's first tidal. First go on the tidal. He's going to have one. Happy days. Well done, Lee.
There we go, trip number 2 down the tidal, trip number 1 for Lee, and he spanked me as he usually does. £12 common last night, now £16 4. Absolute legend, well done buddy. 2 out the tidal, and an overnighter. 3 in total, happy days. Very happy. Well done.
Lee had had an amazing result, 2 in fact. It was approaching 7 in the evening when we were about getting ready to pack up. However, as it turns out, the river wasn't quite finished with me yet, and was about to blow all of my expectations clean out of the water.
£25, 4 ounces. Tidal Sussex River, fully scaled. Nice. The joke I was sitting out for a bit.
So if you look at the pool,
It's a cat.
well, that's it, that was a cat all day long.
That's a river.
It's a proper one.
I managed another overnighter back on the tidal a couple of weeks later, which sadly ended with a blank, no doubt in some small part due to the young grey seal that decided to take up residency in the stretch. On the way back to the car I got charged by one of the cows in the field. Now normally I have a good relationship with our bovine friends, but on this occasion I was very lucky to have escaped without serious injury. As the weeks went by and the pace quickened at work, the autumn turned to winter, and the heavy rain started to fall. Our old mate Brian had always wanted to catch a river carp, so we booked in a 48-hour session back on the non-tidal. The river was in serious flood, and a day spent in the usual hotspots failed to produce anything. Due to the torrential rain overnight and into the following day, it was a struggle to leave the sanctuary of the brolly. With a somewhat dejected Brian losing confidence by the minute, we decided to pack up at dusk and try a day ticket water the next day to salvage some action from the session. But just as the kit was being packed away, my margin bait that had been on the spot for 21 hours screamed off, and as hard as it was to believe, I was into a floodwater carp.
Nearly. Awesome, well done, sir. You may smile. Big cheesy grins all round, please.
Needless to say, this gave Ryan the confidence to stay for another night, but aside from an awesome bankside delivery curry, there was no further action. The next few weeks were spent chasing other species, including river bass on lures at night and some ultralight lure fishing on a new canal that we'd recently discovered. Always good fun. It wasn't long before the winter floods arrived, resulting in some of the worst flooding that I've ever seen in the area. It was early March 2020 before the rivers looked even remotely fishable, although the water was freezing and still carrying an awful lot of colour. A 36-hour session in freezing temperatures and 50-mile-an-hour winds failed to produce anything but a lone bream, and a desperate day session 2 days before the season's end unfortunately ended with a blank. Looking back at the season, we landed a total of 9 carp from the 2 rivers, which, when you take into account the total number of sessions fished, is still a pretty good return for the efforts. June the 16th 2020 isn't too far away, and we've got a couple of new rivers and a canal that we'll be investigating once it warms up. In the meantime, we'll be keeping busy with some shore fishing, and I might even see if I can finally manage to bag a carp from my Reading Syndicate Lake before the ticket runs out. We hope you've enjoyed following our little adventures, and if you ever see us on one of your local rivers, please do come and say hello. Until next season, tight lines.